Good evening, welcome to the Rural Policy Cross-Party Group. I am Graham Day, MSP. I'm the chair tonight. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, we've got a few. I can read them out if you want to.
Can we read them read out, or do you want to move on? Yeah, we'll just take the apologies as given. Is there any additions to the apologies? Thank you. So let's, before we move on to the Cabinet Secretary, I need to advise you that tonight, as you will see, is being recorded audio and visual wise, and with some photographs. Nobody's getting imaging rights from appearing on the video. So if anyone has any concerns about being filmed, could you indicate now? Otherwise we'll just assume everything's fine. If that's the case, can I ask you that if you do ask a question of the Cabinet Secretary when you get to that stage, you give us your name and you are quite clear in your questioning so we can pick it up on the recording if that's okay. So without further ado, can I welcome the Cabinet Secretary on tonight, delighted to have you, Mr. Ewing, and to make their speech.
Well, thank you very much, Graham, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to accept the invitation here tonight from the cross-party group on rural, and of course every cross-party group is a chance for MSPs to meet citizens and former MSPs. Jim, nice to see you, and to have a discussion about matters about which we have a strong shared interest. And I'm very grateful to the Rural Policy Centre for facilitating the opportunity to speak tonight, as well as providing the backup for this meeting. Also, if I could introduce Katrina McLean, who formerly was the Chief Executive of the Crofting Commission, now is working in the civil service. Not a particularly easy job you had at that particular moment in the life of the Crofting Commission, although things have got better since then. But Katrina is a very valued official, and there are other officials here who prefer to remain nameless. Ian, so sorry about that. But you knew I was going to do that. But we're very fortunate with very good officials, and I do appreciate their support. They really help us. What good we achieve is very, very in large part thanks to their efforts. I have a very clear vision for rural Scotland. I see a vibrant rural economy, vibrant communities, thriving communities, using our natural assets to the best advantage, protecting the crown jewels of our environment, using our land in the most appropriate ways in order to sustain those communities and to enable people to live fulfilling, satisfying, successful lives. And that's a very clear vision I have, which I hope at a high level is one that all of us could kind of buy into. And I do very strongly feel that it's my job to help deliver that. And every day I wake up thinking, what can I do for Scotland today? And I'm in a privileged position where the answer is usually quite a lot. And therefore, for a large part of the autumn period of last year, I was engaged in the most complex series of issues ever in my lifetime, of helping the smelter at Fort William survive and move into new ownership of Liberty House, the GFG Alliance, and thereby safeguarding the 170 jobs of people who thought that their necks were on the chopping line. They thought that their future at the plant, which had existed since the 1930s, and the hydro scheme which existed before then, were over. And now, it's early days of course, and nothing is certain in life, but there is a new opportunity for those 170 people with the potential to create 1,000 extra direct jobs and 1,000 indirect jobs, predicted to add over £1 billion to the local economy over the next decade. Success comes in many different sizes in rural Scotland, and that's just one example of the kind of things that I spend my time doing, and prefer frankly to spend my time doing, than argy-bargying about the political stooshy of the day, which I'm not really interested in very much. Other things that are happening in rural Scotland are the launch of the largest floating offshore wind farm, 2 weeks today actually, off Peterhead, with Statoil with a £1,200 million contract. Floating offshore wind is right for Scotland because our water is deeper and therefore it's more costly for the steel for fixed offshore wind. And we can't really compete against the shallower waters in the southeast of England. So if you think about it, our conditions are best for floating offshore because you can shift them to where the prevailing winds are and where the wind can be generating electricity at times that others are not. Or there's the Beatrice, these all relate to the rural economy because they sustain rural communities. The Beatrice Wind Farm 3 billion project, for years the Willie Watt and the community in port at Wick worked hard to secure the servicing of the Beatrice Wind Farm for 30 or 40 years. They've secured that now. I worked with them for 5 years on that. I was in Wick 5 or 6 weeks ago. A whole block by the harbour has now been taken over by SSE, is being refurbished. It was a decrepit building. We're not short of decrepit buildings in rural Scotland, are we? To build new life you need a wee bit of investment. A bit of capital investment does no harm at all. And that project has enabled a plan, not just for the next few years, but for 30, 40 years of the life of that wind farm to help rejuvenate Wick, along with many other successful things there. So there's lots of big things going on, but of course the traditional rural economy is what I suspect many of us are involved in. And in agriculture, we're looking to attract more people, in particular since the average age of a farmer in Scotland is 59. So that's not really where it should be. So Henry Graham is chairing Farming Opportunities for New Entrants, which is to persuade public bodies to make land available for new entrants. A great scheme, F-O-N-E, phone I call it, phone initiative. And we are having some success with that behind the scenes with many public bodies who are participating. I think we can do far more actually to help young people get a start in farming. Not necessarily a whole fully fledged farm, but a start, usually when they're doing other jobs, of course. So we are also co-chairing a task force on women in agriculture with Joyce Campbell from the north of Scotland, a formidable force in business and who herself has achieved huge things in her farm, but also in diversification of all sorts. So women in agriculture is a very exciting development, and one where I think there's enormous opportunities and potential to achieve far, far more. I won't go into all the issues about agriculture because I appreciate there's quite a lot of ground to cover, and I do want to submit myself to grilling or questioning if that's of interest. And crofting plainly is hugely important, and we're tasked to come up with a crofting development plan to reform legislation towards the end of this session of Parliament. And also I think how we use we've got a system of planning and consents to do things in Scotland, whether it's on land or in sea. And the planning system and the consent system sometimes can be quite complicated, and sometimes adversarial in the sense that there are often objections. But I want to make a very simple point. The planning and consent system, whatever they are, they're part of the process. They should be the servant, not the master. The master is getting to an outcome, a positive outcome, and if that can be achieved, it should be done quickly, swiftly, and as simply as possible, and without the protracted experience of years and years of frustration, which all too often seems to bedevil some projects and erode the spirit of the people that are behind the projects and the will to deliver them. And I think we need to address that, and we are. Forestry is contributing enormously to the economy in Scotland, 25,000 jobs, $1 billion a year, and we have targets of 10,000 hectares. We haven't met these targets, I'm afraid to say, but we will meet these targets. I predict we'll meet them in 2 or 3 years' time, and then we will do even better. And only 18% of Scotland is afforested. The average in European mainland countries is 40%. So we're not full up, but the engagement with hill farmers in particular and with sporting estates should be conducted on the basis that forestry and farming, forestry and traditional pursuits, field sports, which have a useful, legitimate role in the economy worth a couple of $100 million a year, these things can be combined. They don't need to be alternatives. They can be combined if there is a will. A plantation of 10, 15 hectares can provide shelter, can provide a means of alleviating flooding problems. There's a scheme in central Scotland where forestry experts spend a day with a farmer, going around the farm in the morning, exploring the possibility for new plantations on an average livestock farm, identifying 2 or 3 possible areas of plantation, going back to the farm kitchen, discussing it, going over the figures. That scheme in central Scotland has had, I think, up to a 40% success rate. Now, I don't know if any of you have been salespeople, but if you're on commission and you're getting a 40% success rate, you're likely to be a happy person. That, I think, shows there is potential for forestry and farming mixed to be combined, using the right land for the right purposes. And I'm not an expert in that. There are here many experts, but they don't need to be enemies. They don't need to be alternatives. They can be combined. So we're doing a lot of work on that. Food and drink is a great success story, turnover of around 14 billion a year. We've got an ambition to double the value of the economy, but you know, the numbers aren't the important thing in cash terms. It's the huge outpouring of entrepreneurialism, of excitement, of commitment that I'm privileged to see in artisan food and drink companies, and new distilleries, and new products, and yogurts, and cheeses, and smoked salmon, in specialist gins, and new distilleries all over the place. And I'm proud to have just purchased a cask for my 9-year-old daughter, which will mature in time for her 18th birthday. Please do come along. There'll be no shortage of stimulation. But seriously, it's tremendously exciting. I was at Gleneagles last night. It's a hard life, you know. And they had an event there which was bringing together buyers from all around the country. I met buyers from Japan, from Singapore, Berlin, California last night, and spoke to quite a lot of them at length. 150 of them in one of the finest hotels in the world. And 140 Scottish food and drink businesses, mostly small businesses, not all, but mostly small businesses. 2 years ago, when this event was last held, the total contracts won, so far as we know, from the responses of the businesses, were £33 million from the 2-day event. Yesterday was far, far bigger, far, far better. 1,000 meetings took place yesterday, one-to-ones for 25 minutes each. I have not heard praise such as there was last night for the SDI officials who organised this event, from the buyers from all over the world. They've sold oatcakes to California, they've sold seaweed to New York, they've sold Scottish gin all over Europe. We are looking at mackerel to Japan, taking it from the Norwegians who cornered the market. If you think about it, our high quality food, I mean, everybody can enjoy it all over the world. So it may seem that the ambition to double the target is ambitious, but it's perfectly achievable, because simply, as one gentleman put it, he said, in Scotland you've got the pure water, you've got the purity of the brand. Everything in Scotland is of high quality, he said. I want to take your produce to Singapore and have a made in Scotland food and drink emporium, and also an internet business. You know, so these events and a lot of money planning going behind it, very, very successful. Sorry, I'm moving away from the script here. Sorry about this, I'm probably going on for far too long. And I don't want to do that because I shouldn't. But I've got bits here and I won't go through them all because I think I should just shut up in a minute or two. There's transport, digital connectivity, tourism, the Islands Bill, Brexit, National Council of Rural Advisors. Sorry about this, Katrina, this is all your work. South of Scotland vehicle, people, of course, at the heart of everything. And I could have gone all of these things, but I would have gone on for far too long. But I'm happy to answer any questions you have. But I am very much looking forward to hearing what you've got to say, and you know, thank Graham and again the people who've been organising this for their work. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. That really set the scene. Happy to invite questions now. As I said earlier, if you could give us your name and speak clearly as regards your question. Could you also keep the questions as succinct as possible so we can get as many people in? So here goes. Who wants to go first?
It's Ian MacDonald. I'm a farmer from the Borders. I was concerned when you were talking there about the average age of farmers at 59. I'm 55, I'm just a young farmer. And I've got a son of 23 who's coming on, and he's the next generation, and that's something I wanted to talk about as well, because we talk a lot about new entrants. We don't necessarily need a lot of new entrants, but we really, really need to look after the next generation. That's the number one priority, because a lot of young people out there, there's a lot of older people out there, girls, boys, who are very, very capable already in the industry. They just need to make sure they're safeguarded and they've got a future. But then back to the average age, I feel when I got to 50, I was qualified to farm. And that's not because I'm a slow learner, it's just because it's a long run into farming, and you don't hand over the reins to a young person who may make quite a lot of mistakes in their early days. You just can't, it just isn't the slack in the job. So it's quite misleading to talk about the average age of farmers being 59. So I just wanted to make a point about that, and if you'd like to comment on that at all, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Well, I think you make very, very good points. I mean, obviously an average is the middle point, and there's lots of people in farming who are a lot older than that, but it's quite high for an average in any sector. I mean, I used to run a business, Ian, myself, and running any business involves a huge commitment. And if you're self-employed, it's around the clock. It's not a 9 to 5 job, and I'm sure many people here know that, and that's the way it is. So, one needs to have businesses that are profitable, and therefore to encourage people like your son to come in or to stay in to farming and not go to other. We need to make sure that so far as government can, we do all we can to assist the view that farming offers a rewarding, a pleasurable, a satisfying, but a profitable side as well. I mean, that is the case. Of course, some financial support is going to continue to be required in farming, I believe. I don't think that we can go off the cliff and have no subsidies. I mean, there are very many practical reasons why we can't do in Scotland what they do in New Zealand, for example. But I do think we need more profitable farming. We also, through SRUC and others, have a range of advice which is available to those in farms. The mood in the task force about women in agriculture was we can do an awful lot more to achieve the potential of both female and male in farms, and particularly females who marry in or move into a partnership in a farm rather than brought up to it, and particularly in relation to financial training, bookkeeping, financial skills, all of these things that you think of immediately, don't you, when you talk about support for small businesses, but perhaps not immediately when you talk about farming. Somehow there's a disconnect there shouldn't be. And I think we need to value farming not only for producing high quality food, but also looking after the countryside, and particularly in hill farming areas. I think that part of the role is something that we just take for granted, but we shouldn't, because if the hill farming ceases and the sheep go and the cattle go, then you get gorse and you get bracken and land abandonment, and that's not what people come to Scotland to see, is it? So there's a lot that we get from farming and farmers, a massive amount that I think we need to recognise, perhaps if we get to the stage of Brexit, because who knows where it's going, but if that were to occur, and that of course is the plan the UK have, then we do need to make sure that there is a sufficient support for farming to continue to operate, particularly the hill farming sector, which I think is kind of nearest to the flames.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Gentleman at the back.
Stephen Thompson from SRUC. Just picking up on that very, very good point in terms of the role that farming plays in the wider economy. With the EU withdrawal bill and the potential for us losing power, in essence, in terms of some areas of agriculture and environment, how is the Scottish government foreseeing this issue of Westminster control over the flexibility that we've had to deliver very good schemes, such as the ones you mentioned, into rural Scotland and into agriculture and the environment, to deliver these outcomes that you're talking about?
Well, we very much want to ensure that agriculture, the environment, that fishing and forestry remain devolved, and that we continue to be able to make the decisions here in Scotland. One illustration of the differences is that 85% of land in Scotland is classified as less favoured area. That figure in south of the border is 15%. So we have entirely different set of farming, type of farming, and set of challenges. I don't want to really go into the politics too much, but my job is to get the best deal for Scotland. So last Monday, I was in London meeting with Leslie Griffiths in Wales, the Northern Ireland Deputy Permanent Secretary, and Michael Gove, and my job simply is to make sure that we get the best possible outcome for Scotland, and that would include the continued possession of the powers that we have to devise the best system for Scotland. And that's perhaps because, you know, who cares more for this country than all of us who are here, who live and work here? We can't expect people who don't to care quite as much.
Can I ask, Cabinet Secretary, developing that theme, from the discussions that you've had with the UK government, is there any progress towards getting migrant seasonal workers permit scheme in place? Because that's obviously a huge concern for the sector.
Well, I'm not aware of any specific progress on that regard, but I very much hope that the uncertainty surrounding the right of people from other EU countries to work here, whether on a permanent or a temporary basis, is removed. I think it's the interest of absolutely everybody, and I've been to a lot of discussions around the country, as you'd expect. And this is one issue where, whatever people's politics, I mean, we cannot run the rural economy without people from the other EU countries. It would be impossible. And none of us would want to go and work in a country where we felt that we may not be welcome. I think whatever the law is, let's just look at it from the personal standpoint, I think. I mean, I don't want to go to certain countries, I'm not going to say which they are, it's not fair, but maybe that's because of false perceptions I've got, it's feelings. And why would you want to go and work somewhere where there's a group of people who seem to think that I would be a problem? So, in any event, I don't want to be political about this. I very much hope that this will be sorted out. I kind of expect it will be, because it's only common sense, really. So surely, you know, we can reach that point sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Anyone else? Gentlemen there.
Good evening, David Rennie, farmer's son who's diversified by working away from the farm. I work for Scottish Enterprise. Interested in your comments on forestry and plantings. A very simple question: why have we failed to meet our planting targets? Is it a financial issue? Is it a behaviour, cultural issue? What is it?
Well, I think the main challenge, David, has been to find available land for forestry. There is no lack of potential investors and investment, but there has been some difficulty in identifying suitable land. I think that's Jo O'Hara, if she were here from the Forestry Commission, would make that point very clearly. But we have not succeeded in meeting our target. I make no bones about that. It's a bit historical. I think we are now together, and I think there is a political consensus largely over forestry between all the parties in the chamber. We passed a debate which was passed unanimously, and we're having a forestry bill we're scrutinising at the moment, which I hope will go through. And I think we've increased the grant money for tree planting. We have increased funding for timber transport. Jim McKinnon, the former chief planner, has overhauled the consenting system, which is becoming a bit burdensome. That has indeed given confidence to some to go ahead. I myself have visited all 5 conservancies in August and visited 4 local authorities and spoken to the leadership where I think forestry is very important. And I think we're pushing it as an open door, and that's why earlier I said, and I'm aware this is being recorded, and people from other parties here, welcome Finlay Carson's here, Conservative member, for yes, and accompanied by colleagues. I just sort of should say that, but taking the trouble to come along tonight. But I do think there's a consensus and a shared view that we need to go ahead with this. But identifying appropriate land has been quite controversial at some points. and therefore there's a lot of work to be done in almost every case to achieve that. But the advantages, I think, will be enormous. And I think particularly the construction sector, I mean, cross-laminated timber sounds a bit boring, but it could be an enormous potential market. I think sawmillers might be tempted to go into it. It would be a perfect addition to the south of Scotland economy, where there's already a very strong presence. So this kind of expansion, with a lot of timber available, quite a lot of confidence in some of the bigger sawmillers to invest the 10, 20, 30 million that you need to do that. That then finances more growing, more contracting, more nurseries, and so on. So I think we are overcoming these problems and doing so in a way that's good for the economy, but also good for the environment, because we do need to plant more trees in respect of our carbon footprint too.
The lady behind here.
Yes, hi, Daphne Glassari from Scottish Environment Link. Just to keep on the forestry theme and just to pick up on your comments about farming and forestry, really welcome comments in terms of how the two can be combined. I was wondering if we can link that into Scotland's ambitions for climate change and the fight against climate change. Last week, the UK Committee on Climate Change published a report where it indicated that if we are to meet our ambitious targets, we would need to revisit some of the sort of voluntary measures with respect to agriculture and focus on that sector in terms of its contribution. I was wondering if there's something more concrete, a response you would be able to make with respect to that comment.
Well, we do have ambitious climate change targets, and Rosanna Cunningham, as you know, used that working with Scottish Environment Link very closely, and I think we've done pretty well, particularly in renewable energy, where I was the Minister for 5 years, so we've got a fairly good record, I think. In farming, and you asked about that, I think I haven't got the stats in front of me, but I know that a fairly substantial majority of farmers have actually availed themselves of things like carbon audits in order to test out whether there's perhaps overuse of fertiliser. And there's a driver for this, because if I was farming, why would I want to spend more money than I have to on fertilisers? It makes financial sense as well as environmental sense. And for that reason, there's quite a good record. And I was very keen to encourage more farmers to do this. I'm kind of a bit hesitant about forcing farmers to do something, particularly if it may not be relevant for all farmers. And to scunner people. If people are forced to do something by a government, dare I say it, a centralising government in Edinburgh, that's the phrase you often hear, then that can often have a counterproductive negative effect. So let's see how we get on with the take-up of that. But I know that from dealing with farmers that there's more and more thought about looking after the land. After all, farmers wake up every morning to look at their farms, and they are the real conservationists at the end of the day, because they are the ones who sculpt the appearance of the country and make it look as it is. So I think we should recognise the valuable role that they play, and the responsibility in increasingly moving towards environmental best practice. I think there's a lot of positives here that I like to talk about, although there's still work to be done, there's no doubt about that.
Gentleman there.
Cabinet Secretary
Sorry, could you give us your name?
Brian McGrath from Scottish Borders Council. You very briefly mentioned digital connectivity. Clearly there's some huge strides being made there, but many areas I'm conscious are still being left behind. How do you see things playing out over the next 4 or 5 years, and what changes do you see coming forward to make a big difference in all areas, not just in some? Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. I think the answer is in two parts. One, what we have nearly finished doing, and two, what we have yet to do. And the first part is that we've been working with BT, the Digital Scotland Superfast Broadband Programme, where we engaged with BT for them to provide superfast broadband access to as many people as we could possibly persuade them to do. This contract has been successful in its own terms. BT, of course, get customers out of this, the assumption in the contract was they would get, I think 20%. I'll correct the record later if that's wrong, but I think it was 20%. I think they've got about 25%. The contract then had a gain share clause, excuse me, where because they get more customers, they put more money into the contract. And incidentally, they put a lot of capital into the contract, to be fair to them, and the UK government put some money in as well. So the contract has succeeded in actually enabling the connection of more than it was intended to. At present, I think we're 780,000, and that's not bad. 780,000 homes and businesses have had access to enable superfast broadband. Of course, not everybody has taken it up. However, that's of scant consolation to those mostly in rural areas, although not all. There's about 38,000 in urban areas who haven't got access, where it's really the responsibility of the market to provide that access. But those who haven't, of course, are very, very frustrated and disenfranchised. So our plan for that, Brian, is R100, to reach 100. Our commitment is to do that by the end of the session of Parliament. We have had an open market review in order to assess the specification of the contract, which, as you can imagine, is extremely complicated. And if you get the spec wrong in a tender, you are in trouble. So that is designed to deal with the remaining who are not connected, and I stress that I am acutely aware this is moved rapidly up the political agenda in the 18 years I've been here, from nowhere to at the top of the agenda. There's no doubt about that. So we're acutely aware that we need to do that. I mean, there's a lot more I can say, but there's two parts to it. There are some parts that will never get access. I mean, we think fibre is the best way to do it because copper restricts the speed of broadband massively. So fibre is the preferred mode. You will not get fibre everywhere. There are some parts that just, it would not be economic to do. It would cost billions of pounds to do it. We don't have that. So there will have to be a supplementary scheme to enable access, whether through satellite or signals through other means, is something that we're also looking at as well. So that's the overall picture, and I can assure you it's something we're spending a lot of time, Brian, working on with yourself and others in local councils too, obviously.
Thank you. John Boyne.
Yes, so my name's John Graham from Buccleuch. Going back to the forestry question, I wonder whether there was an opportunity as we start to imagine post-Brexit redesigning our own system of support mechanisms. One of the things we struggle at the moment in forestry is the disconnect between the quite complicated cascade of decision making through the budgetary process and actually on the ground the cycle of how you make decisions in forestry, which has its particular and the lack of visibility and disconnect between how these things happen. I hope that if we start to think about a simpler system, that the actual decision-making timetable, I think there's a bit of agriculture in this too, the timetable is reflected in the decision process of how budgets are aligned, because I think if you want to advance, I think getting quicker decisions depend on a different timetable.
Yes, so I should say, just for the sake of please, Colin Smith is here from the Labour Party, and Edward Mountain is here. He serves as Edward chairs the REC committee, so that's a very important job. I don't think I missed anybody out, have I, in case I commit a faux pas at this point? No. We do want to see that the process is the servant, not the master, and we get to the outcomes fairly quickly. That's why we had Jim McKinnon do his report. I think there was 22 recommendations. They were all accepted. They're all being implemented by the end of the year, most of them very shortly indeed. And we've also, you may know this, John, we have increased from 5 to 20 with the support of the Environment Committee. We passed the statutory instruments of work legislation increasing from 5 to 20 hectares the threshold for the requirement for a screening for an environmental impact assessment. That sounds awfully boring, and it is, but what it means is that in the 600 cases where there were screenings, only 4 EIAs were required in a period of 18 years. In the other 590 odd cases, the work was, well, effectively wasted, because of course we've got the highest forestry standards in the world, probably. So the environment is well protected by professional forestry practice. So we are doing a lot of things to try to speed it up, and I'm conscious if it takes, say, 3 years for a forestry scheme, you know, people lose the will to live and they maybe just decide to do something else. To be fair, I went round the conservancies so that I got the view of the staff who actually do the job, and what I found was tremendously well motivated professional people who are working in the forestry because it's a vocation. You know, it's a passion. My uncle was in it after being a prisoner of war in Changi, which is I guess the most ghastly experience, which he never talked about, but he spent his life in the open air because he enjoyed the freedom of it and doing something really great for humanity. They're not particularly hugely paid either. So they do a great job. They do a great job, but we've got to make the bureaucracy that they have to follow a wee bit simpler.
Hello, David Walls from Rodian Broadband. We're a small rural supplier of connectivity, digital connectivity, mainly to the farming community and rural inhabitants. We have, obviously we welcome R100 as a great project, and your point about having to get it right at the start so the specifications are not skewed is absolutely vital. To that end, you know, I've got a couple of questions really. One is about the lot size and how that is going to pan out, because that's critical. And we would like to see a situation where small companies such as our own, we employ 16 people now in rural Hungary, can prosper and enter into that on a competitive basis. But the R100 project inevitably will leave a remainder, the hardest to get places. We actually, where we operate, we cover 100%, that's our aim. And we are able to do that in East Lothian. Rural East Lothian is full of trees, full of hills and vales, and that creates a situation where it's impossible to reach everybody. How is that problem going to be addressed?
Okay. Well, that sounds fascinating and well done to get to the stage where you're engaging 16 people, I think you said, so that's a big achievement. And there are successful local schemes around the country. And there are others that have come to grief, partly because in some cases of the insolvency of the provider, and partly because of difficulties, practical difficulties. I think it's fair to say that, you know, it's a difficult area for small players to participate in. You know, rather like electricity supply, you need a certain robust financial standing to be able to provide the continuity that people expect in what is an essential utility, and that's something that we have to bear in mind. So I think that, you know, the way in which we specify the contract we're looking at the moment, and I obviously will be discussing with Parliament in due course with the intention of coming to Parliament to, well, I should say when, but you know, reasonably soon. So we will be specifying the contract in a way that's designed to get competition. I mean, you know, BT has done well in the contract with us, but you don't want only one bidder, because you tend to get a pretty high price that way. You want competitive bids so you get the best value for money taxpayer. And we also need to have further discussions with the UK, because the UK did announce a USO of 10 megabits, which, you know, we think is a bit on the low side. You know, it's a bit like having an ambition to run the 100 meters in sort of 50 seconds. You know, it's not really something that I think many people would regard as compatible with the kind of opportunities that we need connectivity to open up for our children in future, where other countries are perhaps a bit ahead of Scotland and the UK. I don't mean that to be political. That's what I mean. Our speed is 30 megabits. That's our target. Some people say that's too low as well. But the rest, the hard to reach, there will need to be other provision for, and I mentioned vouchers for satellite as one option, but there are many other options, and many communities have come up with extremely innovative means of solving that, and masts have been used. We have relaxed planning for masts, and I found that local authorities all over Scotland have been very keen to participate in this and ensure that masts, where appropriate, can be constructed as quickly as possible to extend the mobile coverage, which of course enables digital access and broadband to some extent in some areas. So there are other means of doing it. We don't want to prescribe, you know, a one-size-fits-all approach, David. I think that would be wrong. So there are other options, but plainly satellite is one such option for houses that, you know, are really, really remote, and perhaps one or two houses, you know, 30, 40 miles away from the nearest settlement, you know, such as in the Western Isles, for example.
Conscious of time, Cabinet Secretary, and the fact that you have to be away in 7 minutes or so. Gentleman here.
Julian Pace from Scottish Enterprise Rural Team. You mentioned Glen Eagles and Singapore and the opportunities. I met some Australian rural businesses recently, and they talk constantly about Indonesia, Singapore, opportunities internationally. I just wondered if you think we could and should be doing more around encouraging all rural businesses to think about wider international opportunities.
Yes, I think that's an absolutely fair point, and you know, I think there's an increasing interest in these two. I should say, I mean, Julian has run one of the most successful training schemes there's ever been in rural Scotland. He's too modest to say so. I think the real compliment is, I think HIE are now, you ran your scheme, just remind me the title of it, Julian?
Rural Leadership Programme.
Rural Leadership Programme. I just mentioned that because it's really very, very well talked of for everybody that went through it. And recently you celebrated your
10th anniversary.
10th anniversary. Thank you for reminding me. I'm 60, you see, the brain cells.
I'm nearly 60.
Yeah, bus pass soon. I got an application form for my birthday. But actually the greatest compliment is Julian's scheme, now HIE are copying it. So that's well done to Julian.
Thank you. David McCracken.
David McCracken from SRUC. I'd just like to go back to the point that Stevie Thompson was making earlier on about how farming and its importance in Scotland and the fragility of it. I was asked to go down to Westminster a couple of months ago to speak to advisors to a range of the select committees about the environmental and different environmental aspirations there are in Scotland compared to the rest of the UK. And I didn't do that, but I started off by saying that hill farming, as you've already identified, is so fragile that if we don't maintain hill farming, we won't maintain the ability to do that environmental management. That came as completely new to those individuals. They just didn't really get how different Scottish hill farming is, as you said yourself, to the rest of the UK. Now, I've been down there, you're down there, but we're only two people. How can the Scottish Government ensure that we actually ensure that the uniqueness of Scottish hill farming and the opportunity, the challenges, but also the opportunities that it faces are known in Westminster, so as that, irrespective of where the decisions are ultimately made, those challenges and those opportunities are to the fore when talking about policy?
Well, many of us here have a role to play there. MSPs from all parties, yourself, David, SRUC, and certainly myself. And as I say, I met with Michael Gove a week ago last Monday, and if he didn't know beforehand about hill farming and the potential challenges, well, he kens new. And the civil servants are at the meeting, I think, would corroborate that. And it's very simple, because you know we are all worried that a scheme which, not perfect, that provided a reasonable financial security for decades may or may not continue. And I have received some assurances from the UK government. I don't want to be political, so I'll just say that you know in politics you don't ever succeed. You just carry on. And success is never final, and failure is not usually fatal either. You carry on. And that's what we will do. We will carry on with the arguments that you know we cannot afford to see that Ian, is it 12, 15,000 hill farmers? Belfast. 11,500. Well, that's 11,500 families in remote communities, often the centre of rural communities. That you know we must have a system that results in the continuance of that as a tradition and as something that contributes to our livestock. If that were to go, our livestock would not be able to sustain the cost of abattoirs, transport, feed, and all the supply chain. And you know, I'm saying that in the hope that we will, once the talks about Brexit move further on, we can then get into the nitty-gritty quite soon. And I am sitting on a committee with Mr. Gove and my Welsh and Northern Irish counterparts. Our job is to do that. There are 7, I think, working groups beneath that. on farming, fishing, forestry, that sort of thing. That was agreed with George Eustace some time ago, and I hope that agreement will not be breached and will be adhered to. We will see, but we will just carry on. And I think comments that I won't repeat, but Damien Green made, I think we actually have got our point across.
We are running short of time. I've got 4 people indicating that they want to ask questions, so please sharp, please. Gentleman at the back there.
Thank you. Madhu Satani from the University of Stirling. Cabinet Secretary, in a number of pieces of work, a number of rural businesses have told us that their growth is frustrated by a shortage of housing for their workers, and they can't expand because of that. I wonder if you've heard that, and if you have, whether you're working with your colleagues in Cabinet to ensure that a reasonable share of the 50,000 additional new homes promised in this session go to rural Scotland.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I'm very pleased you've raised that. I mean, there are 303,000 private sector jobs in rural areas, 51,900 businesses. In many areas there's a shortage of workforce in various areas, and in some areas there is also a shortage of housing. The success of tourism has exacerbated this, and in rural areas, of course, it's very difficult to commute. I mean, you're too far away very often from the areas, even where I stay around Aviemore. You can't really commute from Inverness readily in a day in public transport. It just doesn't really work and fit in with shift patterns. So housing is a big, big challenge. And I do think we need to look again at how we facilitate and enable housing in the countryside and planning. We make it a bit easier, and particularly for farming, to combine housing and forestry, housing and farming, affordable housing, but also housing a wee bit higher up in scale, where in Aviemore people take on jobs in the Cairngorm Brewery or the McDonald's Centre or Conan Bridge or Rothiemurchus, and they just can't get a house. So they stay for a couple of years, they can't get somewhere for their family, and they go. And this is not really a problem that you get in Cumbernauld or Airdrie or Cumbernauld, wherever you live, you can get to your work and back, if you see what I mean. So I'm very seized of this, and I can tell you my colleagues in the government, across the government, are absolutely determined that we do this. It's not easy, of course, because planning is very controversial, and there will always be difficulties. But I think we have to, as a country, tackle this and have a realistic view that we must have more housing, and we can't be too precious about it, I think.
Gentleman, again at the back.
John Mitchell, Anderson Strathairn Solicitors. Cabinet Secretary, I'm a property lawyer practicing in the rural property sector. My question relates to voluntary completion of the land register, and particularly in connection with the rural sector. Myself and colleagues are actively engaged in that process. We are finding Registers of Scotland collaborative. However, I think now that we are approximately 3 years into the process, the scale of the challenge and some of the technical issues that have to be overcome are becoming apparent. I think, in summary, a key challenge is first the mapping standard when you are working in the landward sector. It's appropriate to the urban sector, but I think there's a question arising as to whether it's appropriate to the rural sector, and there's certainly, I think, a resource issue within Registers of Scotland if the 10-year target is to be met.
Yeah, I think these are all well-made points, and in my previous job I was responsible for Registers of Scotland as the sponsoring minister, and we worked out a plan, and we encouraged landowners to voluntarily register, and we kept the fees at a maximum level to not discourage that. Of course, the real cost is the legal fees. Sorry to say that, but the cost is actually the component. It's not the registration fees, it's the legal fees, because the huge amount of work in the states that are on the SAISI register that have to be transformed to the land register. And the benefits, of course, if you're a land register, you've got an indemnified title and you've got a plan, so it's much better all round. It's easier to raise money, it's cheaper to do the conveyancing. Sometimes actually registration means that landowners find they get more than they thought they had. Other times it's the other way around. but it is being inhibited, the process, I think, by resource. It's just a huge task, you know. I think back in 1979, when I studied, when I finished my legal studies, the Land Registration Scotland Act, I think, was of that year, and the plan was to complete it by 1999. What a joke that was. So there we are. It's just a huge task, but I think we are getting there, and there are advantages, I think, to the rural economy in completing that process as quickly as possible. And I was very, very encouraged by the positive response that I got from many landowners, landed estates, where the title would never really get registered because it's always held in trust in most landed estates. So without this system, you know, some people in this room are, you know, are probably better aware about this than me. Without this system of encouragement and joint collaborative working, we won't ever get there. So I hope that that approach is still the one that is being taken now that others are responsible for it.
Thank you. Lady here.
Mary Williams, Edward from Scottish Rural Action. I wondered, Cabinet Secretary, whether I could ask you a question that I think is on Katrina's list about the Council for Rural Advisors.
Sure.
I wonder whether you feel whether the composition as it currently stands is reflective of the rural economy as a whole. I, of course, am mentioning the fact that you've got 14 members, 2 women in enterprise representatives, hooray, big cheers all around, and the rest of the farming and forestry community. Now, in Scottish Rural Action, we're very aware that very often farming and forestry is presented as this is rural life, this is the rural economy. We are concerned that perhaps the composition of the current council does not reflect the totality.
Okay. Well, I would say that 3 points to that. One, the Council of Rural Advisors have agreed at the meeting, the first formal meeting that took place a couple of weeks ago, which I attended, to engage widely with stakeholders in around Scotland, and they are doing that. Prior to that, I had written to over 200 stakeholders stating that their views would be welcomed by the National Council. Thirdly, I work all the time with the key stakeholders, for the NFU, the Crofters Union, the National Sheep Association, as do my colleagues in other parties. But I did want to get views from people that are perhaps not connected, not the people that are often on clangos, if I can put it that. I wanted to get people that have no apparent immediate connection with stakeholders, but people who are out there doing exciting things in Scotland. If you look very carefully at the CVs of all of those, I think you will see that there is actually a fairly wide group of interest. But of course, some of the particular challenges are in relation to agriculture. We must make sure that these are properly canvassed. And in a sense, the fact that the CAP has been there for so long, and the continuance of it directly affects the livelihood of so many people. I think it would have been wrong not to have a solid group who are involved in agriculture, but you see almost every single person who is involved in farming on that group is involved in other things as well. And there are many young females on the group who are very active in all sorts of rural businesses, food and drink, in tourism in particular. Some of the farmers are involved in, for example, tourism as well. So, many of you here in rural Scotland won't be doing one thing. You'll be doing 2 things, or 3 things, or 4 things. The members of the National Council are no exception.
Gentleman behind.
Yeah, thank you. Roland Stone, Timber Transport Forum, Confederation of Forest Industries. My question is really about rural infrastructure and roads particularly. Many of our rural roads are very aged and have their share of decrepitude, as our buildings do. And this puts a dampener on all rural businesses and all people living in rural Scotland. How can we encourage both the Trunk Road Authority and the local roads authorities to invest in rural roads and other transport infrastructure?
Well, I know local authorities do invest in, of course, but some, particularly the rural authorities, Dumfries and Galloway, Borders, Highland, Argyll, they've got a massive network of roads to maintain, and not only roads but bridges as well, which are very expensive things to have to maintain. And there's no doubt that it is a challenge, and we play a role in central government as well in respect of road maintenance. I was pleased to supplement the Timber Transport Fund by £5 million to enable more to be done there, and that will create a lot of goods in rural Scotland. But you know, it is certainly a big challenge. I was fortunate to attend an event not that long ago with Sir Jackie Stewart called the Concours d'Elegance, where people brought their vintage cars, magnificent specimens, to Scotland and stayed in one of the smart hotels around Loch Lomond side. And many of them told me how marvellous our roads were compared with where they came from. So maybe the grass is greener, the potholes are always bigger, I don't know. But I was a bit surprised actually, but I didn't just agree with them. I didn't challenge. And these weren't, as I said to Sir Jackie, I said, these people look fairly rich to me. And Jackie Stewart said, Fergus, these people are not rich. They are super rich.
We are very much moving into extra time here to use football parlance. The gentleman there, if you could give it short.
Thank you, George Milne, sheep farmer and beef farmer, and work part-time in the National Sheep Association. So I welcome all your comments about land abandonment, profitability needed in agriculture and everything, but to me profitability goes along beside demand, and in the sheep industry we have a declining consumption of lamb, which is always a problem. I know QMS do a lot of work on this, but I was helping them with lamb sampling recently in a supermarket, and a lot of the people, consumers, don't really have a full understanding of rural Scotland and the benefits that the sheep industry bring. Not just that, all aspects of agriculture, because one relies on the other. And I think I know your answer to this is going to be, but you know, I think there's a better and more of a need and more work to be done in linking with the consumer and what activities really go on in the rural economy and how important it is for Scotland.
Absolutely, totally agree, George. And in the Scottish Food and Drink fortnight, the Food and Drink fortnight which took place just this last month, we were all asked to do one message about what we would like to change, and mine was eat more Scotch lamb. And it's precisely because I am seized of this issue that as a country we know it's great, but we don't eat very much of it. Other countries have stew as a national dish, you know, number one. And there are so many different ways to cook lamb. I mean, I'm not the chef, but there are so many things you can do. So QMS are very much seized with this, and I think there's an awareness that QMS perhaps seen as favouring the beef side of things in the past. So they have done lots of lamb campaigns, that's right. I enjoyed some Scotch lamb at Glen Eagles last night, just if you're wanting to know about this. And lots of the 150 pretty successful, well-heeled types from Singapore and all over the world were tasting Scotch lamb. So, you know, so hopefully they will have enjoyed delicious food from Scotland as well. So we need to do a lot more, George, and we're happy to work with the NSA, of course, to do that. Okay.
One final brief question from the gentleman there.
Yeah, thank you. David Gast from the Scottish Borders. Can I ask the Minister the Scottish Government's ambition for the new South of Scotland agency? And I guess, as you were saying before, rather than the process, what are the outcomes for that part of rural Scotland that the Scottish Government is looking to achieve?
Well, we want the new agency to assist the economic growth and the development of all economic opportunities that we can possibly do, but building on the strengths of the area. I mean, I think in particular there will be a role for the rural portfolio, me. Not that I'm slow in sticking my neb in, you understand, but there is because of the preeminence of forestry and farming and the rural economy, that's a key component. So we have to think, how do we develop that? I saw, for example, that in England, reading yesterday, that some dairy farmers in parts of England are selling milk to Qatar at the moment, £2 a pint, I think. So you have to think, what more can we do? We want to really have a vision about the SOSV, the South of Scotland vehicle, so that once it's fully fledged, and there'll be legislation for that, it'll be an interbody, and then it'll be fully fledged. That you can build on the forestry and the agriculture, but also building on the other strengths. And I don't represent the south of Scotland. Finlay does here. I think Colin does as well. Is that right, Colin? Yeah. Sorry. So you know, other members might be able to speak more about that area better than me. But our idea is to maximise the economic growth and opportunities, to develop and build on the strengths which are there in spades there. Work with the local authorities who take the trouble here to come tonight. And really see if we can unleash the enormous potential of the south of Scotland, and that is in brief the plan.
Cameron, certainly thank you very much for your time tonight. I think that's been incredibly interesting. And if there's anything by way of follow-up you'd like to,
well, thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm conscious that I think we covered most of the questions that people wanted to ask. Were there any other significant questions that people wanted to ask and didn't, that we could write to the Cabinet Secretary about, or did we give it a fair kick of the ball? Jim, you're bursting to ask.
No. David Walsh, Ewing broadband again. Yes, it was really just to follow up on what the Cabinet Secretary said by way of comment, and there is a further question in it. And it's the question of investing in is an obsolete technology. Copper is limited in what it can deliver, and the future promises to make much bigger demands on broadband than copper will ever deliver. That future is just round the corner. Already some of our customers are gobbling megabits very greedily. How do we address that problem now rather than later? And that has to, because otherwise the same problem will face us. There will be the rural digital divide when the requirement is for 100 megabits or 500 megabits in an average household.
So do you mean a shortage of copper, or do you just get the technology?
No. Copper does not deliver speed. And over distance, speed declines. So you have a situation where, although the provider claims to deliver super fast, the customer 3 miles away gets 2 megabits or less. Many of our customers are operating on half a megabit. Not our customers, sorry, the people we are asked to supply to through the normal telephone channels are only getting half a megabit. That just is not good enough. The same problem is going to arise 5 years down the line, even when people have super fast, supposedly. So how do we address that?
So what are the next sort of technologies that will meet that demand?
No, it's what will R100 do now, rather than take a short-term approach by investing in the obsolete technology. Our view would be that to provide fibre to local communities and allow commercial operators like ourselves to deliver gigabit technology to the local area. That's perfectly possible, and the same funding would probably cover that, and that creates competition, so prices would remain low.
Any other points that we feel to come up? Edward?
Sorry, it's very dangerous. I don't want to make a political point, but the gentleman over there asked about what the UK government were being told about farming in Scotland. I think it would be remiss not to say that I don't think this is a political point, but all parties are actually stressing the importance of agriculture in Scotland. I certainly was down with George Eustace 2 weeks ago discussing the importance of agriculture in Scotland. I guess I come from a farming background. I've got pedigree Simmentals, and I've worked for 15 years in the rural economy as a surveyor. I probably know as much about farming in the Highlands and the difficulties of it. So I don't think it's just the Cabinet Secretary. I think all parties are making the point, and every possible opportunity is being made to make sure that the UK government understands that Scotland is in a very different position to, say, Norfolk or East Anglia, where you can have wheat barons. In Scotland we have people struggling to make a living, and we're very much making the point along with the Cabinet Secretary. I just don't want you to think that that's not the case.
Okay, that point's made. Any other questions that people didn't get the chance to ask that we can write to the council on? Gentlemen here.
Yes, thank you. Alistair Stott, SREC. Just to follow up on the broadband thing, I think it's important once we do get high-speed broadband that we also back that up with the right education and research so that rural businesses can fully exploit that capacity. So I'd be interested to know how what the plans are to try and do that.
Anything else on broadband? Anything else on anything else? David.
No, I guess I don't want to dominate the conversation. I had a question. I mean, clearly Scotland's food and drink is a major sort of income source for the Scottish economy as an export. And clearly there's lots of excellent food and drink businesses all over Scotland. But Scotland's also important from a tourism market as well. And I spend a lot of my time travelling around Scotland, like a lot of tourists do, but I'm working, staying in places where we are presented with the same generic menu, not actually making any use of the type of good quality food and drink that's actually available in those local areas. It's a real bugbear of mine. And I'm not necessarily saying that the Scottish Government can do anything about it, but how can we actually get the wider range of local businesses within Scotland to actually use the products that are there?
I need to get you to come to Angus because we've just launched a new initiative along those lines. But it's a fair point. It's one that we should raise with the Cabinet Secretary. Is that us? Lady at the back.
I'm Maxine from Historic Environment Scotland.
Sorry, could you stand up? Thank you.
I'm Maxine from Historic Environment Scotland. I just wondered where the built heritage sector should be putting its efforts in terms of opportunities for enterprise and tourism.
Okay, that's kind of beginning to stray into another portfolio rather than the Cabinet Secretaries, but bear it in mind. Your question?
Yeah, just to, I suppose, add in some ways to Mary's point about the wider rural economy and the other businesses outside tourism, food and drink, agriculture, which there are some great examples where lots of jobs have been created, lots of investment, but what about the smallest businesses, the home-based businesses, the creative sectors, the business and professional services? What's the Scottish Government doing for supporting those smallest businesses and operating outside those key sectors?
Okay, I'm going to pick up with you at the time when we didn't get the chance. What sectors in particular do you think are not represented in that group? Can you give specific examples?
I think one of the one of the particular problems is that, and I think James' research has highlighted it, that in the rural areas there are a plethora of micro businesses that are falling under the horizon. They're not being seen because they're not registered for VAT or PAYE. Potentially, I think that we should be looking at these small businesses as a group, as growth drivers, and looking at what we can do in terms of encouraging their development. I know I said before, when we talk about growth, is the current pattern of growth, the current model of growth that we have the right thing, when a lot of the businesses that we're talking about here are going to be more hanging on by their fingernails than nipping down the road to Japan to sell a crate of something. And I think that it is not just that it's the smallness of it, it's the scale of it that I would say I would want to see done. And even if you look at farming, I would again say we're looking at small businesses here, businesses that can be handed on from mother to daughter. Okay, and that comes out in some excellent reports on women in agriculture. But it is my main concern would be the scale of what we're talking about. And I see, or I hear, when I look at the sort of the general way everything is going in terms of housing rural advisors, that everything's on the large scale, and there's little focus on the small scale. And I think that David's point about the need to encourage small scale, because it's only the small scale that are actually going to serve the rural communities.
Is it not the role of local authorities to take account of that? Because I think in the area that I represent, we have a fantastic economic development department that very much focuses on supporting food and drink at that level. Is that primarily the role of national government and national structures, or isn't it really about local delivery and support?
I think anybody who is concerned about the rural community would actually say, we'll look at wherever support can come from. And I would not like to feel that there is sort of a sectorial advance or divisiveness amongst any kind of funding body, any kind of support body, and any attempt to actually pass on. I'm not saying this is what you're suggesting, Graham, but any attempt to pass on from central government, from the Scottish government, to the local councils, I would see as a divisive and not a positive move. That may be not what you were
It wasn't at all. I was just suggesting that they have that kind of local focus, and I've seen a very good example of it working, and I just wondered if that was where it was best coming from. But
I'm sure that could be a point at which the delivery is on the ground, but I think we need from the central government, from the Scottish government, we need policy statements which say, and we're looking after the small ones, we're looking at the small scale for broadband, for the rural economy generally, and for farming as well.
Right. Is that us? We've covered it. Sorry, jumping here. Last point.
Peter Ross, I'm chair of the Increasing Valley Leader. I also represent Scottish chairs as well. Leader, I've been for 25 years, I'm leader in Increasing Valley, and it does support small businesses, but I do take a point, it needs some sort of effort from to make sure that the rural economy can face this big economy that's apparently coming, and it's already there in some respects, and that creates a terrible fear among people that how are they going to get the next trust from in some respects. So I think you're right in some respects. We need to think about the wider rural economy and think about how we deal with it.
We're not going to have to call a halt at that point because we've got a business. We will. Can I ask you to delegate to the conveners of Commons also sitting here to sign off on that letter to go to the government? Are you happy with that? Okay, covering the points that we've just agreed. Sorry, force of habit usually gets switched on for us. Right, we have some. Maybe it's done automatically. That sounded terrible. Yes, the usual gentleman sat there that does all the microphones. It's very good. I don't know what you're laughing at, you know that. Yes, please, myself. Anyway, moving swiftly on. So we've agreed the action points. We need to approve the minutes from the last meeting of 2016-17, which was on the subject of successful policy and delivery for rural Scotland, learning from elsewhere. It was something in July. I'm looking for somebody who was at that meeting to propose and second those.
I'll propose and second.
Thank you very much.
Convener, sorry.
Jim Hugh. I knew there was a good reason for you being here. Okay, thank you for that. We need to move on to the AGM and the technicalities around re-registration and the election of office bearers. So do you want to clear that up, Jim?
Yeah, so we just need to, I guess, confirm that the 4 co-conveners are willing to continue if they are. And
do you want to name them for them?
Yes, sorry, so obviously it's Graham Day, Colin Smith, who's here, Mark Ruskell, who I think sent his apologies tonight, and John Scott, who also sent his apologies.
So we need support for those 4 co-conveners or the removal of. It's entirely up to you. So can we have if you're happy with that, can we have a proposal for that? Jim? Second up.
I'll do it.
Okay. Any other business? Any other? Oh yes, I forgot about that. Yes.
Yeah.
We also have to re-select the secretariat. Yes, so we can all see what we really think. No, what we really think is you've done a fantastic job. We really appreciate the thing. I think speak for everybody in saying that. Are you willing to continue in the role? Are we happy for that to be the case? Yes, absolutely. Thank you for all your efforts over the last year. Any other matters arising that you want to discuss? No? Okay. The date of the next meeting is Tuesday the 5th of December. The subject is the rural workforce. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you. Safe journey home.